Hello and welcome back to the third and final installment in the build series of the Junkers Ju87 G1/G2 Stuka from Border Model in 1/35 scale. And in this video we are going to focus on a number of things, starting from the instrument panel, which came pretty much separate from the cockpit, and then we move on to the canopy, and then afterwards we move on and do the whole camouflage scheme that you see on the box itself. And after that we are going to do the white winter camo scheme that I had in my mind, and after that we are going to do some feathering and some finishing touches, whatever that means, am I right? So anyway, let's not beat around the bush and let's get right into it. So we have arrived at the instrument panel, which is quite separate from the cockpit internals, if you remember that build. First we put in that headrest or chin rest that the pilot uses when leans in to target. And now we put on the rudder pedals, which, well, to be honest, they are quite simple compared to what this kit is, and to others of course. And yeah, but it's not going to be that visible, so I'm not too fussed about it. The panel itself looks okay, but yeah, those rudder pedals, those are very jank. After priming and painting the whole thing with my lightened up cockpit gray, now I'm using black to color in the targeting sight, and then going to use light brown to color in that headrest kind of thing. Both of the paints are from AK 3rd generation acrylics. After that was done, I sealed everything with a satin varnish to move to the next step, which is putting on the decals. And here I should point out that that is not the whole instrument panel as one big decal. That's just an outline which you want to remove, like I did here. And each instrument is its own small tiny detail decal. And I wasn't prepared for this, but in the end it turned out quite right. And of course you might have noticed that I haven't painted the panel itself black, because looking at some references it looked like that it was just regular cockpit gray as well. And now one by one I put all the instruments into their places. And to be honest, this is a much better way to do than having just one big film of the instrument panels. Some of them were like really small, like that one, and you really want to make sure that it's in the right position and it's not twisted and turned. Again, this kind of instrument panel decal system is quite good. It's finicky, but it gives a much better result. So I quite liked it, even when I was at first a bit afraid to do it. You can see that it looks really good. Too bad that everything will be closed and you're not going to see that much of it. But at least we know it's there. And now we are going to use some UV curing resin. Now at first it might look like, well, it not just might, but it actually looks like it has some yellowish tint, but so far when I cure it, it seems to cure clear. And even if it has a bit of yellowish tint, You don't really see it that much when it's such a small detail and it's a really tiny amount of resin. It's a really thin layer on top of these instruments. And just a side note, I did use some black and red paint to paint some of the buttons and switches on the panel itself, as you can see. Also, if you're curious, what I use to apply resin is just a thin steel wire glued into a piece of wood. I use this to apply resin and super glue as well. It's simple and does the trick. All done, so let's get to curing. And using this little UV LED light, it cures everything in just seconds. Well, it does cure in seconds, but this guy really likes to take his time and make sure everything is nicely cured, like now. Yep, all done. Now let's move on to weathering. Now using some enamel panel liner does the trick quite well, just letting it run through and around those instruments and buttons and levers and whatnot, and make the whole panel look a bit darker as well, so it will give a bit better representation of this cockpit gray now, and it will help to distinguish each instrument and detail on the panel itself. And one last dot right there, and all looking good. I think we can say that this is done. Now let's put it in place. As you can see, it's just slots on there, and the fit here as well, again, perfect. No problems, no big gaps or anything. Just run some glue along the two sides of it, and it's all done. There we go. Nice and snug. Now the Stuka canopy is quite interesting, to be honest, because here you can see that some parts are on the inside and some parts of the frame are on the outside. Like for example, the vertical frames like that, it is on the inside, and the ones which run horizontally and on the side of the frame are on the outside. So you're going to have to do double masking, because you have to mask the outside and the inside as well. And I did see other modelers do it, not caring about this kind of thing and just masking it on the outside and painting those frames in. I was like, yeah, but that's not really how it should be. I know that me and realism is not necessarily the best friends from time to time, but I felt like that this is the kind of challenge I do want to try, so that's what I did. But as you can see, I use my usual technique where I use thin, very thin strips of Tamiya masking tape and just run them along the frames and then fill the rest in with the silicone masking liquid. And now you can see me masking off the internal frame like here, and that is quite finicky. Again, there are a few finicky moments in this build, I will give you that, but yeah, I just mask it through and be done with it. Just like that. all the way from one end to the other. All done. And now, as I said, now I fill in everything with liquid masking. You have to be patient because the masking liquid can be a bit unruly and not wanting to flow properly on the surface because it's quite slippery, and you have to convince it to go from edge to edge, but then you want to make sure that you're not running over the tape. And now I'm doing the same thing after the outside dried with the inside. I just go and just slap this on without any care because it's just a very tiny part of the whole internal framing that's needing the paint. And I'm not going to mask off the bottom parts of this canopy structure because that's going to be masked off from the outside anyway. I'm not going to do the insides. Now, sorry for leaving out some parts of the whole painting session. I should mention here that the insides were painted with the cockpit gray. What I mean is that the internal frame parts were painted with the cockpit gray, not with the outside camouflage greens. And I think that's more accurate. Anyway, the main thing here, what I want to show you, well, not show you, but talk about it, is that if you noticed, it is quite, the canopy is quite foggy. That's because I used VMS satin varnish as a base coat. I'm sure you remember if you watched my other videos, especially the Zero from Airfix, which I built. I had quite a few problems with paint peeling from these canopies, these clear plastics, and I wanted to try if I would put down a varnish before the paints, and it worked. I do recommend putting down varnish on your clear plastics, the canopies, if you are using water-based acrylics, because water-based acrylics have a hard time to stick to these kind of plastics, and you might not want to use primer as an undercoat. Rather use a varnish, preferably satin or matte varnish, and then you can still use the internal cockpit colors as an undercoat and then the camouflage colors as a top one. And it's all good. And man, this plane is huge. It barely fits in my paint booth. I had such a hard time to do the painting on this one. It's just huge. That wingspan. Now let's take a quick detour and focus on the landing gear. And let's start with some priming. And as a usual suspect, Mission Models gray primer. What else? After that, let's use RLM 71 from Mission Models. But whilst this guy is painting the landing gear, I'm going to go on a bit of a rant, but it's not about the kit. It's more about the paint. And if you have seen my other videos, you might know that I love Mission Model paints, and I still do. But what I found is that the greens, and it doesn't matter which green, it can be this dark RLM 71 green or a lighter green, like for example an interior green, it has problems going down in nice even coat. I had to do multiple passes. Now here it's not that prominent because the landing gear is quite small, so the surface area is not that big, so you don't really see it. But later on, I think it will going to be more visible here on the video as well. Anyway, I don't know why. All the other colors I don't have any problem with, but the greens are shit. I don't know if they know this, or they have a newer color pigmentation which is better, but the ones I have are just bad, all of them. I don't know what the hell is going on with the greens. Anyway, here I am masking off that middle section, which is like, I would assume it's made out of leather or something. It's a cover for the internals, for the shock absorbers. And yeah, and based on reference images, those are usually brown. And here it is. Again, I use mission models. Brown is perfectly fine. It works well. It's only the greens. And that's it. It looks nice and eye-catching. And after this, I did the wheels. Again, with mission models tire black, which is like a very dark gray. I masked off all the parts of the cover and just quickly spray painted it. And it's all done. There we go. Nice and sharp, looking great. And after everything has dried, I use AK Extreme Metal Aluminum to paint in the wheel. Luckily, in this scale, it's quite big, so it wasn't that hard to paint it in. All done and seems to be good. Let's move on to the next hurdle. And that is to paint the landing gear white. Well, at least the bottom part white. Looking at some reference images, one can find that the landing gear was also painted white during winter with this water washable paint that they used on the field. And I didn't want it to do like a convoluted scheme or anything on the landing gear. I just wanted to give it a simple yet uneven coat of white paint. And of course it is mission models plain old white. One thing to note that I didn't paint the bottom of the landing gear because if the plane is at rest, the crew wouldn't have enough room to do it. So I left them in the green. But anyway, let's move on to the next thing, shall we? After priming the gun pods with Mission Models Grey Primer, I use RLM65 again from Mission Models to give a nice even coat. And again, this paint didn't have any problems going down with a nice even surface finish. Afterwards, I did mask the surrounding area of that open hatch on the gun pod side to be able to paint the insides with some gunmetal. And of course, this is just, you know, trying to work smart and not having to paint up all the insides of the gun pod when it is not really visible at all. And this did the trick actually. And of course there is still one piece missing that will go fit right in. And then I went on and painted the front part of the gun pod, which is actually sticking out below the wing, and that part was usually painted over with some camouflage color. In this case I used the other green, RLM70. And of course here I'm just taking my time building up the opacity nice and slow and making sure that it looks alright according to some reference images, but overall I'm just eyeballing it, because if you look at images on the internet you can see that these were probably painted on by hand and the edges are really soft where the two paints meet. And it's looking quite sharp. Well, not sharp, I should say it's rather soft, the edges I mean. And with that, let's move on to the next step. Now finally we have arrived at the body, and after I did the usual priming, I go on and use this stencil to create some unevenness on the undersurface. I'm not going to do it on the top surface because there is going to be a lot on top of it. It's not going to be visible at all. Usually I would also do like panel line outlining, the pre-shading, but I was against it later on because it's such a big plane, it's such a big surface. I was afraid that it wouldn't look too good. If it's like a 1/72 scale, I think that it's quite okay, but like 1/35 Stuka, man, that's just... it would have felt wrong. Anyway, after I did all this pre-shading kind of stenciling technique, I went on and did like a 60-40 thinner to paint ratio RLM 65 from Mission Models and just started to do multiple thin coats to make sure that the paint is not going to be 100% opaque and all this pre-shading is going to be slightly visible. Again, you don't want to rush this part, just making really thin layers of paint until you're happy with the results. After I finished this painting up, I went ahead and masked off the wingtips for the yellow identification markings. First, I've put down some base white, and then on the white I put down the yellow like that. This helps the yellow to pop nicely and be really vibrant. And removing the masking, it reveals that it was quite a success. There was a tiny bit of overspray, but that's not going to be visible after I do all the weathering up and everything. And now comes the fun part, the top surface, with RLM 70 at first, because this is the lighter of the two dark greens. I thought I'm going to use this to put down a nice even coat. And this was where I started to experience this weird behavior of the green, or should I say the Mission Models greens. As you can see, I didn't do any pre-shading or anything because you have this camouflage paint layer, then you're going to have the white winter washable layer, and yeah, none of the pre-shading is going to be visible after that. So I just went on ahead with on the primer on top. And again, I've been doing a lot of painting here and was really struggling to get a nice even coat. As you can see, it's quite blotchy. In the end, I was like, screw it, I'm not going to put down too much paint because I don't want to clog up all the fine detail. And again, this is going to be covered up with a lot of white anyway. And now I did the camouflage scheme using RLM 71 and masking everything down one by one, like first the wings, and then I went on to mask off the fuselage as well. I tried to do things separately and not trying to mask off everything at once. And I hope that here on the video as well, it's quite visible how bad the surface finish is. Well, I will be honest, I wasn't that really miffed about it, again, because it's not going to be that visible and it gives like a bit of a worn look as well, but I would expect paint going down better and with much better coverage. I don't know what kind of what kind of pigments Mission Model uses for their greens, but it's definitely not working out. And I can safely say, whilst I'm editing this video, I've been working on another plane which has greens in it, and I used AK third generation acrylic greens in that, and that didn't have any problems at all. The greens were like properly going down and not having any kind of issues with coverage whatsoever. So I can say that this is really something with Mission Models. I don't know what, but they really need to fix this. And now I'm doing the fuselage and the canopy frames. And as you can see, I didn't glue the engine cowling in place exactly because of this, that I going to be able to take it off and paint it much easier than having it already fixed to the plane. And we are arriving at the place in time where I almost lost my shit, but I definitely lost my mojo, well, most of my mojo, to continue this plane. And this is why. Ever had this problem? Removing the masking tape, and there you go, the paint comes with it. Awesome. And when you think that's all, then you continue on and surprise, surprise, more paint comes off. And especially in a place where you have two paint meet up. Great. Now you have to remask everything and do it again. And I shall tell you, I am not going to show you, but I did those parts like 3 times. In the end, I went on ahead and I actually sanded the surface. I don't know what the hell is with this kit or Border Models, what they use, like release agent when they get the molding out of the molds during manufacturing. I don't know, but I had the worst time in certain places, the paint not sticking, refusing to stick to the surface. It was horrible. I was actually contemplating to moving over to lacquer paints because of this. But then again, I don't want to throw out all the water-based acrylics I accumulated over the years. Because I do like them, I do want to use them, but yes, lacquer paints started to sound like something really, really cool. And of course, it is worth mentioning that this is why a lot of people, and now including myself, would recommend that always wash your sprues before painting. And in fact, it should be the very first thing you do when you get the plastic out of the bag, out of the box. I use warm water with a tiny amount of dishwashing liquid and isopropyl alcohol in it. So it removes any kind of grease, fat whatsoever from the surface of the plastic, which could inhibit the paint from sticking. And by the way, here you saw me painting on that yellow band at the end of the fuselage. And of course, I haven't watched this model before I started to work on it, and this is why I ended up suffering a lot. So don't be like me, be smarter. Okay, so I do apologize for jumping in the progress a bit again. Well, not a bit, but quite a lot, because as you can see, I've already finished all the decaling. But at this point, you should know how to do decals, putting down varnish, applying decals with microsol, microset, and then applying varnish again to seal them in. And that's what I did. I used VMS satin varnish and then Microsoft and microsol on the decals, and then VMS satin varnish again. Now about the decals are quite good. It's not like Tamiya thickness, but it's not like the high-end cartograph ones either. It is a good middle, it has a good amount of thickness, and it adheres to the surface well and takes up all the surface detail. So no complaints over that. But actually, let's talk about what I'm doing here right now, which is applying the masking for the winter camo that I want to make with this plane. And yes, you saw, well, I used a yellow 6 from another kit because I didn't want to use Ruddle's markings as every other goddamn G1, G2 Stuka has. I wanted to do something else, so I came up with my own. And yeah, so I did all this masking detail with liquid, and it was quite a chore, but I think the end result is going to be quite good. And again, I should mention that I am using my trusty silicone brush, or silicone sculpting brush, I should say, here, because it's just so much easier to clean afterwards. If you would do this with a regular brush, like be it synthetic and God forbid a Kalinsky, you would have a bad time cleaning that. So I highly recommend to pick these up from Amazon, eBay, or like your local hobby store if they have one, because these are really good for handling these kind of nasty liquids like the masking liquid. And after letting the masking liquid cure, I used white mission models with just a tiny amount of their retarder or polyurethane, so it could be rehydrated with water if I need to do some extra weathering or fading on it, which I didn't do in the end because I was quite pleased with the end result without all these extra things, and I wanted to have it finished at that point, so I just opted against it. Now you saw me that at first I tried to pick it off like gently with a tweezer, but the thing is that it would have been like very finicky. So what I found is a really good way to remove it, that you use your fingers and you just start rubbing it, and then it will roll up nicely from the surface. And because I already have the varnish underneath, so I am not fussed about potentially damaging the paint underneath or anything. And if the white paint gets a bit flaky and damaged, that's not a problem, because that was its purpose, right? It was a water washable single-use paint during winter on these planes, so getting that damaged is not a problem. It just adds to effect in my opinion, but the paint held quite well onto the satin varnish surface anyway. So yeah, so I just kept on rubbing and rubbing until everything was gone. And of course make sure that you remove it from everywhere, because this masking liquid can flow into the smallest nooks and crannies, places you wouldn't even think it can get into, but it does, and then it is a bit finicky to get it out. And of course, don't worry, I'm not going to bore you showing how I took all the masking off. It's just this one wing to give you a good idea. But let's move on to panel lining, where I used these two colors in 50-50 mix with some odorless thinner. At first I just wanted to do the panel lines, but then I realized that there is more to it, because there are loads of rivet detail on the surface of the Stuka, and what would be the point if we are not making sure that it's visible? And because of that, I went ahead and, as you can see, I smothered the whole plane with panel lining wash, just to make sure that all the rivets, or at least majority of rivets, are going to be visible. And of course, before I did this, I did apply another layer of satin varnish from VMS to seal the white paint in as well. because we don't want that to get mixed with any kind of liquids and potentially damaging it. And after leaving it to dry, I try to remove the excess with some tissue paper, which is not the best. First of all, it doesn't remove everything unless you really rub it in, and second of all, as you can see, the panel lines do keep the wash in, but the rivets are way more shallower than the lines themselves, so it is losing the rivet detail, which is not good. And now I try to soften it up with some thinner using a cotton bud, but that's not going to work either, because again the rivets are shallower than the lines, and because of that the wash is going to be lifted out of it. And of course the staining, which I really want to get rid of, mostly because I want a more whitish white, not a very stained white. It's going to stay there. But luckily I found an actual better way to remove enamel or oil-based dry wash. And here is how you do it. You use blue tack. Yes, you heard me right. It's good old blue tack that I resorted to, and it is quite good actually. Well, I did remove most of it with just the tissue paper, but then afterwards I went over it with blue tack. And the funny thing is that it can lift up really stubborn ones as well. And it leaves the oil paint in the shallow recesses as well, because it doesn't go into it. It's just the top surface that gets rubbed, so to speak. Of course, it has its downside, which is that it's quite stiff of a material. This means that I wouldn't probably recommend it using it on other than flat surfaces. Like I wouldn't want to use it on a tank, for example, because tanks usually have a lot of tiny bits and pieces sticking out or being glued on the surface, and it will just going to get snagged and so on and so forth. But if it comes to planes where you have a lot of flat surface, I think it's a very good tool that you can use to remove very stubborn oil stains being left over from the weathering. Now let's focus on the underside, and here you can see that I'm using a different shade of black. It's a bluish black mix that I created, and well, to be honest, at first I was quite afraid that it's going to be too blue, so to speak, and yeah, but then I decided just to muscle through and see what the end result is going to be. Sometimes in this hobby it's just that you don't know how it's going to look after it's done, and at the very first steps it looks horrible, but then if you're lucky and you made the right choice, then it is going to be okay in the end. And I think it is okay in the end. In hindsight, I probably should have used the same color mixture on the bottom as what I used on the top, but hey, we learn from our mistakes and then move on, hopefully. After it's done, I went on and let it dry, and without even trying to take most of it off with a cotton bud or a tissue paper, I went ahead and attacked it with the blue tack. And as you can see, it was wonderful. It took most of the stuff off. I did leave some of it on, you know, so it has a nice subtle marbling effect, which I quite liked in the end. But as you can see, it is quite good, and all the rivet detail is nicely preserved. You can see here how it stained the surface, and of course if I would have rubbed it a bit more, then I would have gotten a bit more cleaner surface, but I decided against it. But please let me know in the comments what you think about this technique, or you ever tried it, or you ever heard about from anyone else trying to use blue tack. Now let's focus on the weathering of the landing wheels, and here I'm just using some pigment fixer and dousing it onto the wheel, and with another brush I apply a very generous amount of Vallejo pigments. I think it's a mixture of burnt sienna and European earth, and don't worry, it is very dark, very reddish right now, but it will tone down a bit after everything is dried. And I am going very generous. I am trying to think about that because it's winter time, and as there is some thaw, the runway is getting a bit more muddy and stuff like that. It will be picked up by the wheels big time. Here I'm adding an extra little snow effect on top of the mud. I don't think it's turned out that good, but I just wanted to add a bit more snow to really rub in that winter vibe. But anyway, I should mention that Tamiya weathering tool that you see here on the video, that is like 20 years old. I bought it like 20 years ago. Of course, I haven't been using it during that time because I was on and off from the hobby, and I just recently got back like 4 years ago. But anyway, that is an old one, and it just shows that a lot of things in this hobby really can last for a lifetime, and you really shouldn't throw out something because you think that, oh, it's too old. It's not too old, it's going to work. So just keep it and make sure that when the time comes, you use it well. And here is a newer one, of course, for a bit of an extra dirt effect. Yeah, this Weathering Master set. It's quite nice, although one thing I don't like, that they don't really give you multiple brushes. Like I would at least want to have like 3-4 of these brushes, so you can use it per color, per weathering effect color you see, because I don't really necessarily want to contaminate it. But as you can see here, I do give a bit of extra more brown color into that reddish one, because I found it in the end a bit too red for my liking. And that's why I wanted to have a bit more brown to tone the red down. And it rhymed. I also use this mod effect on the gun pods, just to simulate possible little mud and dirt on the bottom of the pods. And I went a bit slow with it and try to make it a bit subtle with my fingers, but yeah, it's not the best. I will be honest with you guys, at this point I just wanted to have it done. I wasn't really that much into the weathering. I know that I could have done way more because it's a big bird, so you can really go to town on it if you like doing weathering, but because all the stuff I experienced with the paint flaking and like all that grief that gave me, I had very little mojo, and that shows as well that I wasn't really into finishing this whole video series because it did leave a bit of a bad taste in my mouth and in my brain as a memory. So for a while I don't think I want to build any Stukas, but probably in in the future I will make another one. I also use this mod to give a bit of extra effect at the rear landing gear and the rudder bottom, but yeah, I didn't really do too much with it. But you can always say that sometimes less is more. And frankly, in the end, I was still satisfied with the end result, and that's what really matters. Another testament to my mojo loss and that I wanted to finish this build as fast as possible is that I almost forgot finishing up this radar behind the gunner seat, and now quickly painting it up with a dark gray. And frankly, I didn't do anything else afterwards, although I should have done more, but as I said, at this point I just wanted to be done, and it really doesn't make too much of a difference because not much of this is visible anyway. Now let's finish up the searchlight mounted in the wing by using my favorite PVA glue. Just a tiny drop, I don't need that much. And using my trusty handmade applicator tool, I just put a tiny amount on all sides before I put in the cover. And you can see that I used some silver paint to paint in the light itself. You could go and put some yellow on the light bulb in the middle, which I haven't done. I should have actually done a bit more, or at least give some panel line around the edge of the bulb, but it is what it is now. It is going to be all closed up like so. A bit of checking, yeah, and all done. It's not that bad. Of course it could be better, but it's good enough. And now we are moving on to the cover for the radar. And here as well, what I would say that they do give you this decal, but I would advise you to rather use paint to highlight those radar lines. I don't know what I would call them, but like there are some lines. I think it's like metal wiring in the cover itself, glued on there from the inside, I presume. But yeah, you have this decal I've put on the inside of the cover. But yeah, I would say that rather use paint, because as you can see, this is not going to be proper see-through because the carrier film has this matte finish, and it's not going to be that great. And the other thing that I did, that the cover itself has an edge that you want to paint. So what I did beforehand, that I cut out a circular masking, and then I painted the edge of the cover with the camouflage colors. Now after I use some decal softener, and I use a cotton bud here to push the decal even more down, but as you can see, it's not going to be totally transparent. It is going to be a bit like this stained mattish finish in the middle, which again you can avoid if you use paint rather than the supplied decal. Much as I wanted to be done at this point, I did still go and went and did some modding on the wing roots where the crew would usually walk around, and you have those anti-slip surface detail on there as well. and I thought that that would be a great place to have some mud, as it would rub it off from the crew's boots. So that's what I did. I used here, I think it's European earth. Yes, it's a bit reddish, but I was very generous with it, and then I used pigment binder to fix it down. So what you do here, that you put all the pigment down, like really big lumps of it, and then you go and you load a brush up with a lot of pigment binder, and then you just drop it off and let the binder seep through all the pigment clumps, and then fix it over there. And after the whole thing has dried, you can see that I took out this weathering tool from Tamiya again, and I added a bit of mud brown on there to dampen the reddishness that the pigment has. And when that's done, I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the wheels, to add a bit of white with the snow weathering effect from Tamiya. You know, the one that I said is like over 20 years old, and here it is. Just adding a bit to soften it and to give a bit whitish effect on it. That's good. Looking pretty. Again, you can add more. You can you can weather the ever-living hell out of these things, but sometimes again I just feel less is more. And now I'm going to glue in the radar cover. Here I'm using regular Tamiya quick dry cement, and you might ask why, because this is a clear part as well. The reason why I used the Tamiya cement here, because the clear part edge has paint on it, so even if it would fog it a bit along the edges, it's not going to be visible because the paint will cover it up. But anyway, I used blue tack to put it in place, and it's done. For the rear turrets, I used gunmetal and some wood brown on the handle and the shoulder pads. One thing to note, which is, well, quite a big thing with this rear gun, is that you don't want to put these little crosshairs on before you put the gun in and put the canopy on top, because it's not going to fit through the canopy opening. So probably this should be the last thing you're going to do, because these are really tiny, really finicky. Then you put it on in the end and just go over it like with a gunmetal color or whatever color you used on the gun itself, and that's done. And I'm done here. Finally, I'm done with this whole project. I'm done with the video series as well, so hooray. And of course, I should say that I am deeply sorry it took so long. I wanted to smash this out really fast, but then this whole thing happened with the paint flaking off, which I don't know why. I wouldn't say that it is necessarily the kit's fault. Probably there is some kind of release agent which Border Model use when they are making these kits, which is really not playing nicely with water-based acrylic paints. And yeah, that really killed my mojo, as I said, and it was a chore afterwards doing anything. And because of that, because that bad taste in my mouth, it was really a chore to make this video series as well. But in the end, I muscled through both, and I can have this finally behind me. Of course, there are some things which I haven't shown you in the video series, which is to putting the gun pods in place, the propeller, and the rear landing gear, which, like the propeller, I use the same dark green color as you can find in the camo scheme, and then some chipping on it with AK Extreme Metal Aluminium. And I think I've overdone the chipping a bit, but you should be the judge. Again, a lot of times less is more, and we should abide by that rule, especially when it's planes. Too much feathering is not good for a plane in my opinion, but anyway, it's really a personal preference. So about the kit, what I would say, it's a very nice kit. The outside is absolutely fantastic with all the rivet detail. I think Border Models did an absolute bang up job with it, but there are some parts which are like horrible, like the cockpit internals are bad, lackluster. There is not much going for it. So if you have any aftermarket stuff that you can get, or you love scratch building, then it's great because you can upgrade it, but the thing out of the box is not great at all. It is bad. It is very again, lackluster. It has nothing going for it really. Other than that, fitting was great. There were not too many issues, and yeah, overall it's a great kit, and the outside is superb. But that is what really matters with the plane now, doesn't it? That the outside should be gorgeous and with a lot of tiny details, which you have it in this one. Well, my friends, that's it. I don't really know what else to say. Again, I'm sorry that it took so long. It's the middle of summer and we are still doing winter themed things. But there are other two projects which I finished during this time, which will be in edit shortly and then hopefully coming out much faster than this did. And with this, let's get to our closing statement. Please like, subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram as well. You can have a look at my gallery on my website or my web shop. You can find me on eBay and Etsy with my stuff. I do have these flight stands for sale. I do have some other bits and bobs, like for example wall mounts. I have some glue holders. I do have vat palette stuff as well if you want that. And I also recently started doing one-on-one replicas of tank shells. Like for example, for now you can find the 50mm ones of 4 types of them, which was used by Panzerfreeze and whatnot, and you can find the 75mm one for the Panther and the famous 88mm tank shell as well. But that's enough for the shameless plug. And yeah, as again, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. If you want to leave a comment, positive, negative, doesn't matter. I am happy to read both types, or even neutral. That's really up to you. And see you on the next one. Bye bye.